I'm Hanish Patel, and this is User Friendly, the show where we explore emerging trends in tech, media, and telecom, and how they impact business, operations, and the world around you. Today, people have access to more information than ever before. And with continued advances in technology such as artificial intelligence and machine learning, the ability to solve the world's complex problems will only continue to expand. Information is key, and search is central to accessing it, which at its core is about understanding language. So what does this all mean when users are faced with different languages, nuances, intent, and mediums when looking for the answers to their searches? Joining me today to discuss search and opportunities for the future are Pandu Nayak, Google Fellow and Vice President of Search, and Raghu Gurumurthy, Chief Innovation and Chief Digital Officer at Deloitte. Pandu, Raghu, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Good to be here. Thank you for having us.
No, absolutely. This is going to be such a great topic that's so close to all of us, right? So let me begin. And as you guys know, on User Friendly, I really like to break down a topic into something that's digestible for our listeners. And since the future of search and on all things around the advances of search can be quite broad and is certainly a complex topic, let's start off with maybe Pandu, if you can help us level set and set the discussion around sharing your perspective on just where search is at and the evolution of search.
Thanks, Hanish. That's a great question. And, it's one that we think about a lot. But a really good place to start is just with some basic background on how search works, because I think that sets up for the future of search very nicely.
Right.
And a great place to start for that is just Google's mission, which really tells us how search works, which is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. So if you look at organize the world's information, what does that mean? The world's information, a lot of it is, of course, on the web. And to organize it, the first thing we do is to go get all this content, crawl it, acquire the content, and bring it onto our servers. And then we create an index of the web. And what's an index? An index is just like the index at the back of a book. So there's a word, and here are all the pages that it occurs on. Except there's two important differences. One simple difference is just that of scale. A book, of course, has maybe 300 pages. Maybe it's a Game of Thrones book and it's 1,000 pages long. The web, of course, has hundreds of billions of pages. So the scale of this index that we build is something quite remarkable. The second difference is that when you look up an index at the back of a book, you look it up one word at a time. But on the web, of course, you look up multiple words at a time, which means there's a combinatorial explosion in the number of ways that you can look up the index of the web. And in fact, we get billions of queries every day from around the world because of this combinatorial explosion. So this is the essence of how we organize the world's information. And then the next part is how you make it useful. And for that, you need ranking, right? Because if I simply said, here are the million pages that match your search query, that's not actually very helpful because you don't have time to look through the million pages. So we need to rank these pages in some way so that the most helpful pages are at the top of the ranking. And that's what the Google search algorithm does. It has to be done, of course, algorithmically because of the scale challenges. And so we can talk more about that, but the issues of understanding language are at the heart of this ranking algorithm.
So I think about what you said, Pandu, around it's, there's one word at a time, as you use the analogy with a book, right? And even just as we're having this conversation, none of us are speaking one word at a time, right? We're joining those words together to structure that sentence. And it's obvious language is so crucial to the way that search would work and ensuring that it works well. So with that in mind, what are the big innovations that we've seen over the years around that kind of natural language query, understanding natural language, the way that I would ask something versus someone else to still make it relevant and efficient and really find the things that I'm looking for in a natural way? Would love to get both of your perspectives on that.
Yeah, as you just noted, Hanish, understanding language is really at the heart of search, right? You need to understand the language of queries. What did you mean when you asked the question? You need to understand the language of documents. What does the document talk about? And how do they relate to each other? How do the queries relate to the documents? This is really at the heart of it. And we've been developing language understanding techniques since the very earliest days, even with simple things like spelling correction, for example, depends on an understanding of how language works. And over the years, we've developed many different techniques, but in the last 5 to 7 years, there's been sort of an acceleration in the technological development around language understanding because of the advent of deep learning or machine learning with these deep neural networks. That's been a huge advance in these times. First, with these so-called feed-forward networks, that were the first sort of generation of neural networks that came out. But then about 2 3 years ago, there was a new system that the Google research team built called BERT, which is based on this technology called transformers. And this particular technology really highlighted and used the thing that is important about language, that is using context better. And suddenly you could get a lot of nuance in queries and documents that you couldn't get before. And so we used BERT within search. I think we launched something in 2019 and saw one of the biggest gains in search quality because of the sort of the enhanced language understanding that we got. This trend towards these types of models, these transformer-based models that are becoming larger and larger, has really culminated in a new model that we created last year called the Multitask Unified Model, which we fondly call MUM. And MUM is this remarkable model that does both language understanding as well as language generation. It's about 1,000 times larger than the BERT model that we had, and is incredibly more capable in the kinds of things that it can do. And in particular, that multitask aspect says it can be used for a variety of tasks within search, things like ranking, things like information extraction, things like classification. All of these things are enabled by this single model in a quite remarkable way. And so we're just seeing this acceleration in language understanding and all of the capabilities that we can now build because of that.
So, Pandu, if I could this is fascinating. If search is about not only giving me what I'm looking for, but maybe also what I should be looking for. So it looks like what BERT and MUM can perhaps get to the Holy Grail. And it is not only contextually relevant, you could also make it personalized, contextually relevant for me versus for somebody else. Is my understanding correct? Is that the Holy Grail? Is that what we are going, Pandu?
I mean, I think there are absolutely cases where things like personalization and all are important, especially for very broad topics where there's a variety of answers. But for many other situations, the heart of it is just understanding language, which turns out to be much more subtle and nuanced than one might imagine. So let me give you one of my favorite example queries that sort of in a small way illustrates this point. Many years ago, I saw this query in one of the experiments we were running, which was, the query was, is soul good for kids? Right? And when I say this query, you and I immediately understand that sole is a kind of fish. And this is probably a concerned parent that is wondering whether it's okay to feed their child sole. At the time of this experiment, which was probably about a decade ago, Google search did not understand this query at all. It thought sole was really about the soles of shoes, and it was showing lots of results about shoes for kids. So this is an example of not understanding it. And the experiment we were running at the time was a particular innovation in language understanding, where suddenly Search understood that, in fact, sole was a kind of fish. So today, if you do that query, is sole good for kids? You'll find that we seem to have understood that sole is indeed all about fish and it's all about suggestions on fish. But even today, you'll find lower down in the page the occasional result on shoes. So we haven't quite nailed it yet. And so there is more work to be done in understanding these kinds of subtle nuances in language. And that's where I think the real innovation comes. You and I take language for granted, but to automate it is incredibly subtle and nuanced.
I can only imagine. And that is only speaking of English language. Now, if you make search in other languages, this culture and language comes, it is going to be an enormous challenge.
I completely agree with you on that. And we operate in countries around the world. So, of course, we have to specialize and use language understanding in all of these places. And in places like India, people are multilingual. And so you don't even have just people speaking English or just Hindi. They will often speak a mix of it, sort of more like Hinglish. And so you need to understand the complexities of that too.
That's great. Pando, you struck me in that example that you talked about in terms of is so good for children, right? And if I don't think about, we talked about evolution and how the internet has evolved through text-based and then image-based. And obviously over the last N number of years, so much more audio and video formats. How would that work, or what's the evolution going to be for mum when it comes to, say, audio? Because I could say soul is so good for kids, and some may think soul music is really good for kids, right? And they may think of it from a music perspective, not as a part of a shoe or a type of fish. So I'd love to get your thoughts on like where that evolution is going to continue to grow for mum or whatever it be, as to bringing in the audio and the video formats as well.
That's a super insightful question, Hanish. One of the really exciting opportunities that we're looking at for mum is in the area of multimodal search. Mm-hmm. It turns out that for various technical reasons, you can use both images and text, for example, as inputs to a mum model, and it can understand the relationship between images and text. Now, if you can do this, there's a whole lot of questions you can ask that are not easy to ask as simply text questions. So let's say you saw a shirt that someone is wearing with this really nice pattern on it, mm-hmm. and you wanted the same shirt but in a different color. How would you describe that? Right? Well, the most natural way to describe it is in a multimodal fashion. You show a picture of the shirt and you say, I want it in red, right? Let's say there's something wrong with your bicycle, with the mechanism on the rear wheel. And you don't know what the mechanism is called, but you know there's something wrong with it and you don't want to know how to fix it. Well, a natural way to ask that question is to take a picture of the mechanism and say how to fix. Mm-hmm. And that would allow the system to maybe understand that that mechanism at the back is a derailleur and show you results on how to fix a derailleur. So there's a whole lot of use cases that open up when you think of things in this sort of multimodal action. I've given you examples of cases with images and text, but there's no reason why this technology couldn't be pushed to handle videos, for example.
Got it.
Right?
Got it.
So I think this is the direction that mum is going right now in allowing these sort of more multimodal experiences, because you're absolutely right. The world and the internet and people's experiences, they're not text-based at all. We have images, we have videos, we have audio, and getting sort of a consistent understanding of all that is going on and be able to express, in our case, queries in sort of this richer way, I think really is an exciting future.
And this sort of leads me to a place I want to explore with the both of you as well. If I think about what you've described in terms of just getting richer, getting better at queries, getting things that are more contextually and relevant back to me, as it becomes significantly more intelligent, and I would use a different term, maybe even more powerful in what it can do. What are the ethical considerations that we need to bring into that, be that data privacy, frankly, AI bias, and we've heard a lot about misinformation over the years. So how do companies then continue to maintain trust with that as a backdrop as well?
This is something that we take extremely seriously, right? And in some ways have since the very beginning. You pointed out to various risks there. So let me just walk through some of the ideas that we've pursued in addressing some of those risks. So let's start with misinformation, right? Which we know there's a lot going on here. And Google search has for the longest time had some core ideas for dealing with misinformation, which has to do with having some notion of the reliability of sources of information. Your listeners might remember way back when Google started, they had this notion of PageRank, which was a measure of how reliable a particular source was.
Right.
And so from the very beginning, Google Search has had this notion of reliability of sources that they use to try and surface the highest quality information available. And over the years, we have significantly invested in this kind of thing. This is orthogonal to language understanding per se, rather it's about the reliability of sources that are saying things. And we've invested significantly in sort of signals and ideas for understanding the reliability of sources, which has allowed us to deal with things like misinformation quite effectively, I think. The other points you raise are around bias and that kind of thing and those types of problems. And there, I think we have sort of two ways to think about it. One is just making sure our models themselves, these machine learning models that we create, that we try to address bias and problems in them. And there's a number of techniques we can use to do that. But more importantly, we think of addressing the bias problem as an end-to-end problem for the particular application we're building. And for that, we have long had a very rigorous evaluation process that we use before we launch any particular product. And that the rigorous evaluation process is a way of trying to identify patterns of problems, of all kinds of problems. They could be relevance problems, or they could be bias or stereotype problems. But it's this rigorous evaluation process that we have that helps us proactively identify these problems so that we can address them before they go out. And so this is how we mitigate these problems along the way.
So actually, this is a pleasure to hear that the last part of what you said, Pandu, because as we are working with our clients, you got to look at the process. Well, who's collecting information, what information is collected, how it is used, completely out of the algorithms. Of course, then you got to look at the statistical algorithmic bias as well. And you got to bring it together. That's one of the things Deloitte talks about, machines with. It's about machines not doing things on their own. It's really humans end-to-end controlling the system, understanding how the system works. Bias is never going to go away. As long as the human beings, we're going to have bias. The question is, how do you reduce it? How do you correct for it? How do you make the error function more uniformly distributed as opposed to, which is, it's just even a harder problem for Google because search sounds like one application. It is billions of applications. Whereas for our enterprise clients, if you're thinking about search around product recommendations, search around providing customer experience in this context, those are all more controlled questions where we can look at the end-to-end system, what data is collected and how we can show enterprise customers have a better shot at addressing these biases and addressing these ethical issues. Of course, Google has a bigger challenge addressing it at a consumer level.
Just what you mentioned there, Raghu, I want to touch upon enterprise. I'm going to come back to you on that one, right? So just hold that thought. I wanted to dig in one area, just finally around that kind of multitask unified model, Pandu, that you also mentioned, or what, AKA MUM, right? And we talked about becoming more powerful. And I think about just everything happening at a global level, right? And you both touched upon it. It's not just in a given language, it's multiple languages, way different things happen. I'd love to get a sense from you in terms of, as Mum continues to evolve, continues to get more powerful, how might this impact how information is like you say, structured, indexed, ranked, and how it's searched upon at a more global level?
The way I think about this, and what makes me really excited about this whole line of work, is that we've seen over and over again that as we understand language better, we are just able to bring more powerful capabilities for users to get the information they need to get, do whatever it is they're doing in their lives. And that's the real promise of something like what's happening with Mum. You get both the ability to do the kinds of things that we do today better, but you also get the ability to create new experiences like the multimodal experiences we talked about, new ways of querying to find new types of information that is better structured, that is easier to understand, easier to explore, all of these things. We really want to think of this as a tool that users can use to answer whatever question they have to help with what they're doing right now. And at the heart of it is this type of technology.
Pandey, this opens up tremendous opportunities. I mean, it's creating new businesses, to your point, which enables you to look for, I like the shirt, can I get a shirt in this fit? Image-based search for e-commerce, real. Yeah, I can send a picture of myself, and based on this, how much information is available based on that, what kind of design choices, things that are part of the possible in e-commerce, part of the possible in terms of the product design, and information, a feedback loop for the enterprise in terms of product design, be it consumer products or what have you, increases the pace and velocity of innovation and drives the cost of innovation down as well. So the technology which we call search, Mom and Bert, I think is enormous, especially with the amount of information available.
So let's focus in on enterprise for a while, right? And you said it, right? Search, when we think about it, is often focused in on ourselves. I want that shirt, or I want that experience. I want to find some information, or I have a question. But what are the implications when we look at it at an enterprise level?
The art of the possible is a lot, right? I mean, it could be technicians trying to fix a refrigerator or trying to fix a fiber optic cable can search based on what's going on at that context and get some feedback loop. Education, the entire education sector can be how information is organized, video, text, and how do you feed the information. Distance learning, the art of it can be better, higher quality. And that's another application. Of course, we talked about e-commerce applications. This is only me riffing based on top of mind, few ideas. I'm sure Google team is thinking about it day in and day out, applications of technology. I think the lines between how enterprises use technology and how consumers use technology, those lines are blurring. And the adoption of what's available in the consumer world becoming available for the enterprise IT world, it's increasing at a faster pace. And it's up to us, this community, to figure out that we get more of all the research that Google is doing, and Bert or Mom and Lambda. How do all this translate into productivity? Productivity, not just because it is dollars and cents for corporate America. With increase in productivity, it helps society. So it's the goodness that how Google can contribute to it. And by the way, I was just thinking about search and impact on ESG, how search and the contextual search can help in reducing disasters or decreasing the time to fix an issue. We have intelligent engines right now for disaster recovery. How do you move things? California, there's a fire, there is flood in Florida. How do you move certain equipments to different parts? How do you help store different things? So all these things, search and information, flow of information, that's what digitization of the world is all about.
I think you're exactly right, Raghu. You mentioned a whole number of applications that one could have. The one that I just want to highlight here is the education application, which is really exciting. We're of course looking at education from a consumer perspective, so for kids and so forth. And in fact, just this morning, I was talking to the team that's working on using Mum for some very interesting education applications. But those same kinds of ideas could well apply within education, within the enterprise. I think there's just a lot of richness in what's possible with education going forward.
Lovely.
Yeah, I mean, just as the both of you are describing the enterprise or the potentials as well as implications, I was getting pretty excited with some of the examples you were citing, particularly even Raghu, as you mentioned, the environmental, social and governance element of ESG and the impact it can have there. So I want to close out by just asking you both, at a personal level, what excites you most about the future of search and how it's going to evolve?
In all honesty, my strength is not on the product side. I'm not a product person. So I'm not going to say that I'm excited about some new experiences. What I focus on is more of the technology. And what I've really been excited about is what this technology has been able to do. And more importantly, the promise of this, how this technology is evolving. For some years now, I've said that we are at an inflection point in language understanding. And to me, today, we've passed that inflection point and we are rapidly accelerating. This is important because, as I said, language is an extremely nuanced and subtle and difficult thing. But this technology is really taking off right now. And so I am extremely excited about where it's going. And I have full confidence that we'll be able to convert this technology into, compelling user experiences as we go forward.
Pandu, it's a pleasure to hear that. I think the hardest thing is to solve the language challenge, and I'm glad that we hit the inflection point. In terms of the art of the possible, I think you said it before, say it now, which is, so I would like to get what I'm looking for, and I'd like to get what I should be looking for. If we can do search to get us there, that'll be phenomenal. Because it's going to solve lots of issues for us on a daily life and professional life. And the advancement in language, and you talked about bringing it multimodal, text, video, and audio, because the interfaces, that's where the world is going. If you could put that technology to get an answer that I'm looking for and what I should be looking for, that'll be the holy grail, Anesh.
Perfect. I'm excited for that holy grail. I was just imagining it as you were talking through it. So I want to thank the both of you. This has been incredibly insightful, and I've learned an incredible amount just listening to the two of you as you're talking through search and the evolution, and super excited to that point around where you said it's just the inflection point and how that's going to convert to compelling user experiences. I mean, certainly I'd say today we learned a lot more about the evolution of search and how technologies like Mum have allowed us to interface with a search engine in a different way, right? And produce information that's useful and that's relevant. And while the way we experience the world around us may be changing, there's significant evolution taking place. And we talked about earlier, from text to image to audio to video. And, now more and more over the last year or two, we're hearing about things like metaverse, or what we call at the firm unlimited reality. So finding new ways to kind of access different information is going to be essential. But certainly technology's ability to supercharge the types of information we can understand will be key to, I guess, furthering our knowledge in the future. And with that, I want to thank the both of you, Pandu and Raghu, for joining me today. And until next time, happy listening.
Thank you.
Thank you again for having us.
Thanks for listening to User Friendly. To subscribe or listen to more episodes, search for Deloitte User Friendly in your favorite podcatcher, or find us online at userfriendly.deloitte.com. If you like what you hear, please rate us on Apple Podcasts and leave a review. The opinions expressed by guests on this podcast belong to them and do not necessarily reflect those of Deloitte. This podcast should not be deemed or construed to be for the purposes of soliciting business for any of the companies mentioned, nor does Deloitte advocate or endorse the services or products provided by these companies.